Hi HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today we have a special guest. We're joined by Dan Cable. Dan is a professor of organizational behavior at the London Business School. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us and taking time before your book tour.
Nice one.
We grabbed you before you're gone. Dan, for people that don't know who you are and our listeners, give us a bit of an overview about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Great. I would say industrial psychology is where I started this whole process out. As an undergrad, I fell for it. And I think that it had a lot to do with making work feel more like real life, if I had to summarize it. So I fell for that hard. And it made me sad how many people saw work as kind of a four-letter word. In my family and my friends and so on. That astounded me. So I went on and got a PhD in something called industrial relations. Then I became a professor rather than pursuing the path of doing it. I started learning even more about it.
Why did you take that? Because obviously people get to that point where they're going to go either down the practitioner route or they're going to go down the academic. Why the academic route?
It's a great question. Sometimes it's really hard to know why you choose what you choose. I know that for me, I loved this idea of research. I love the idea of having an idea and then not just chasing it down, but gathering data and trying to subject it to scrutiny. So for me, becoming a professor meant that I could get the ideas and have the impact, but I could be talking about things that I could support with evidence. I can't say why that's so important.
And you get paid for it. Do you know what? It sounds like a good deal to me, Dan.
It's a triple threat.
So what led you to the London Business School then? How did
that's a great question too. I was at Georgia Tech for a little while and I was at University of North Carolina for a while. And I took a little sabbatical. I mean, it was supposed to be 3 months. And I came over here to London and, to be honest, it had a lot to do with London. It really lit me up as a person. International, but also just how cultured it was. And so I needed a little more taste. So I went back to UNC and I negotiated a 1-year sabbatical. And I never went home after that. I've been here for 9 years now.
Wow. So how did the relationship come about then with the London Business School?
I had some friends here and I had some folks that did similar research, and to have me come and teach a course was easy for them, to come and sort of bring my research and sort of talk to the students about it. That's very easy to set up. Little harder to get the visa in order to make it a full-time situation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because that's always a challenge. It's getting even harder now.
It is. In both sides of these shores and also in the US.
Yeah, let's not get into that. So where we are now then, what would you say is your area of expertise?
So organizational behavior is what I do a lot of. This is the idea that you're trying to help people feel engaged and motivated to produce outcomes that customers love. A lot of what I focus on is the idea of competitive advantage through employee engagement. So that's the thing that I love, and I probably obsess on that, frankly. That's what I spend all my time.
I suppose it's a job to obsess over something, which is
That's right.
So what's one thing that HR leaders don't know around organizational behavior, or perhaps they should be paying more attention to?
Yeah, I would say the coolest thing that I've learned in the last 2 years is the topic of this book that I'm going to launch now. It's this idea that we know that disengagement is rampant. We know that lots and lots of people feel that work is like a commute to the weekend. It's like they shut off to get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so many of us, including me as of 3 years ago, saw this as kind of a motivational problem, like some kind of a bug that people had, and they ought to just snap out of it and engage, live life and bring your whole self to work. And I think that what I learned that's so surprising is that it's not really a motivational problem. It's a biological one. I learned about this part of the brain, and we can talk a lot about this if you want.
Let's go for it. I'm interested.
It's really fabulous. There's a part of the brain, and the technical word is ventral striatum, but the neuroscientists call it a seeking system. And the seeking system is a part of our brain that urges us to explore, learn new things, push on the boundaries of what you already know. I think I'm just going to say this really quick. I don't think that we have built organizations to capitalize on the seeking system. I think that we built organizations frankly, during the 1900s.
To keep people in line.
Keep them in line. Controls.
Yeah, control. You was trying to find a way of nicely saying it, basically.
I was looking for a better way. I mean, you could talk about efficiency. You could talk about predictability. You could talk about... Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's control and predictability, and that means systems that capture who's not doing it.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think we can all relate to that.
Yes.
But it's also one of the biggest shifts that we're now seeing, where we're finding that the companies that operate the other way around are more productive, they're more innovative, and they're the ones that are changing the game, right?
That's so right. And I think that if you thought about the source of sustained competitive advantage, like what I mean is which firm is going to win, it's the firms that adapt. It's the firms that can quickly try new things and experiment with what the customer might want. It's firms that are innovating on the fly. They're not waiting for the senior leaders to think up the new ideas and then cascade them down. So it really feels like there's a golden age right now to be an HR leader, number one. But I would say for employees, the idea that the positive emotions that come out of the seeking system. What do I mean by that? I mean curiosity. I mean excitement. I mean enthusiasm. I mean zest. You know, these are emotions. These are discrete emotions. In the past, these were called error. Henry Ford thought these were something to squash like a bug.
Yeah.
And I think that what's so incredible is that we have a system that's pre-built to deliver this, but you have to activate it. And I'm afraid that so many of our HR systems are built to deactivate it.
Yeah. So what's the most common reason? Is there a particular, based on the research, is there a particular time frame that people get disengaged? Is there a particular reason more than others what did you come across when you did the research?
Two things. It's such a good question. The first one is just a sad, funny one where when you come out of university or when you come out of college or whatever, you have this idea, at least most people do, that maybe you're special.
I love this topic. This is a great topic. You know, it's like I studied 3 years. Now the hard work's done.
Yes.
Now I'm going to go into It is all of a sudden. Wait a minute. This is now my journey begins. Yeah.
You have this sense that maybe people will care about your ideas and that you can use your brain. Like you really go into it thinking that, and then after about 2 years, Chris, you start to realize, oh shit, this is all it is. Like it's just hearing what other people need me to do. Like I have all these ideas, but every time I try them, I get a slap on the wrist or I get a punishment or I get told to get in line. So I think that's one bit. And then a second bit that I find really compelling is I've spent about 25 years studying entry, organizational entry, like getting a job in the first couple of weeks and months. And there's a second opportunity there where hope springs eternal. And you can just see when these people get these new jobs that they kind of think this one's going to be different. My boss just told me that he encourages learning, that there's a whole part of the performance system that's about learning and development. But a lot of times after about 3 to 5 months, you realize it's just the same thing again. As soon as I try something creative, they call it an error. Or as soon as I do something that's not predicted, they call it a mistake.
I can relate to that. First of all, I didn't go to university. I kind of skipped that and was like, I just want a job.
Yeah.
And when I went into that, they said, "Oh, you need a degree to be a salesperson here." And I said, "Why do I need a degree to sell?" I said, "Is there a degree for sales?" And they were like, "No, but that's not the point. You need a degree." I was like, "No, why?" And the marketing, the sales director and the HR director had no answer for it.
Yeah,
I was like, "Just give me a job." And I realized early on, even the job that they had sold me was completely different. So I think organizations have a part to play in that of can they live up to the expectations of what they're actually, the way they're promoting the role.
Yep.
As well. And especially as a sales director in the previous companies, I've seen that joy of those university grads come in, slowly disappear.
Yes.
The initial excitement and fun when they realize, well, okay.
Yeah, it's this for 20 years. It's this,
exactly.
This small set of activities.
Yeah.
As far as I can see into the future, it's the same repetitive, somewhat aimless set of action.
Yeah, and I did that for 10 years. And every time I tried to break out of that, like you said, and go, I want to be a bit more creative. Let me do a podcast. Or, by the way, some of the ideas, this podcast we're doing right now, I introduced that into my previous companies. They're like, that's not your job. Stay in your lane.
Exactly.
Stay in your lane. You're in sales. Don't talk to me about marketing and production and operations, Chris. I'm like, but I want to do more. So yeah, and that sucked all the joy out, like you said. So
that's exactly it.
So how can companies activate the seeking system in their businesses?
It looks like there's three ways. The first one is this idea about encouraging people to play to strengths. So why don't I take these in turn? This notion of playing to strengths, I think there's lots of firms that say that. I think it's trickier to do than to say, because what it often really means is letting people recraft or resculpt their jobs, just as you were saying.
Yeah.
It gets in the way of efficiency. It's this idea that we can't really treat everybody as the same. We can't give them all the same job title, the same job description. We can't pay them the same way because we can't evaluate them the same way. So the whole idea
how do you monitor it? Yeah.
Allowing people to play to their strengths, though, does seem to activate this ventral striatum. There's been a series of studies showing that when you get people to reflect on who they are when they're at their best, like what their potential is, it lights up this part of the brain. On fMRI studies, blood rushes to the ventral striatum and it releases dopamine. So that's the first one. And I think it's hard, but I'm just kind of giving you the biology here. Mm-hmm. The biology is getting people to reflect on and then play to their strengths. And that means customizing the job around.
Which when you get to 100,000 employees.
Exactly.
It's how do you monitor, maintain, how do you know what success looks like?
That's it. Each one of these, we can come back to this actually, each one of these is going to demand freedom within the frame. And that's really important. It's actually one of the most important concepts in this book that I put together. It is the case that we have to deliver on time. It is the case that we have customer demands. It is the case that we have regulations that we have to meet by law. It is the case that big companies have policies so that there's a consistent level of service no matter where you are in the world. So those are realities. Those are organizational realities, and we cannot ignore them as we talk about the freedom of activating that seeking system. So it's not easy what we're saying here, but I really love this part. That's why the firms that get it will have a sustained competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. Because it is really hard to do this well, most firms won't do it. They'll keep acting the way they've acted until they go out of business. And the newer, younger firms that do this well, I think will thrive.
And I think you hit on a good point before we hit record. This is something which is reflected within entrepreneurs.
Yes, it's something that entrepreneurs do naturally.
Yeah.
You and I have both worked in small firms where there isn't really a job title. There really isn't a job description. It's like, serve the customer, get the work done.
Yeah, and that's the same with me and my partners here. We all do a bit of everything.
Yep. And that's what makes it so enjoyable, right?
Exactly.
Because you don't know exactly how to add the value. It depends on what comes up and my unique strengths.
And also when we do have those ideas, we're not blocked by internal red. We don't have any red tape. Entrepreneurs don't have red tape.
Not yet. You know,
not yet. My red tape's the other business, the other partners. So
that's right.
Their job's to calm me down until I get carried away with details. But yeah, and you mentioned those other points. So
let's talk about 2 and 3.
Yeah,
the second one is this encouraging experimentation. It's this idea of allowing people within the frame of their job to try to change the how of the job, even though they still have to accomplish the same frame in terms of the organizational outcomes, delighting the customer, making sure that the work itself is completed. Within there, they might have a different approach that they find exciting, or it might be the case that they have unique ideas or little talents that they just like to try out. And so like a really classic way to do this that, it's not a secret anymore, is this approach of giving people a 24-hour stretch where you just say, for the next day, work on anything you want, with whomever you want, wherever you want. The only goal is that in 24 hours, we're all going to sit down here and talk about what did you try and what did you learn? And that has been demonstrated to release energy and get great ideas and great innovations.
All companies like Amazon, right?
Amazon would do this, but I got to tell you, I tried this at it's called Deal Logic. It's right here in the UK. And this is one of these firms that does computer and software stuff for like Goldman Sachs and these huge multinational financial firms where everything has to be perfect. And we still gave them this 24 hours, and so many great ideas came out of this. And several employees told me that's the most fun I've ever had at work. Working.
That's what you want.
Yeah,
one of the things I realized about those type of organizations, and I learned this recently, is a lot of companies now are rewarding failure.
That's right. And
so
the idea,
it's the other way around now, because otherwise, if they're not taking any risks and pushing the boundaries, people are actually going to be promoted based on like, you've had so many more failures. So we're going to promote you, which is the complete opposite of how any other business runs traditionally, right?
Right on. So my friend at Intel told me about his first performance review, and he said it just shocked the hell out of him because he went in there having met all of his SMART goals and he hit all of his objectives for the year, and he thought, I'm a winner. And his boss started the conversation by saying, what went wrong? And he said, what do you mean? I mean, I hit all of my goals. He's like, yeah, but if you hit all your goals and you set them a year ago, what did you learn? I mean, it sounds like you didn't exactly stretch very far. And here's what he said. If we at Intel continue to act that way, meaning that we meet the goals and the expectations of our shareholders, our shares don't move. We have to surprise. And it was just such a radical wake-up call to this guy who thought because he hit all of the targets, he was a winner. The answer is, well, no, you have to push to failure. You have to learn something that you didn't know.
Yeah. It's like nowhere near on that level, but it's same with my my sales guys that I used to have. They would hit their target. Maybe it's a monthly target. They'll hit it in the first week, and then they'll coast for the rest of the month.
Yes.
But I hit my target, but you didn't do anything for the next 3 weeks.
Then we just shut off.
Yeah, but I hit my target. And technically they are right, because that's how you've put it on paper of this is how you're measured.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's predictable. It's reliable.
Yeah, but we never grow.
No.
If we only ever just hit our target, okay, don't get me wrong, we put the targets up every year, but it's very interesting. Very, very interesting. So what, and there's a third one, right?
There's a third one. I got to get it out there because in some ways it might be one of the, could be the most important. It's this notion of sense of purpose or meaning.
So important. Oh my God.
It's so important because our brain, and not just our brain, by the way, other mammals too, we're looking for the cause and effect of our actions on the environment. We're looking how the way we act affects other people and the environment. And we started making these organizations in the 1900s where very few people get to see the whole process of production. Everybody does a tiny little segment where you don't really get to see the invention bit. You don't really get to see the production bit. You don't get to see the sales bit. You don't get to see the customers being happy or unhappy bit. Now, in your line of work as an entrepreneur, you see the whole thing and it feels great.
Yeah.
You see idea from inception to production to execution. Lots of people don't have that opportunity. Like you got somebody that works in, say, an online store. They might post pictures 8 or 9 hours a day. But like they don't take the pictures. They don't produce the goods. They don't set the prices. They don't talk to the customers. They just have to post pictures all day. Yeah,
they have no idea that perhaps that one picture influenced someone to buy that product.
That's right.
And then the end goal was someone had a great product because it was a really good picture.
That's right.
They don't understand the impact.
So the evidence, just to kind of restate this, is when you encourage people to play to their strengths, when you get them to experiment, play around and learn on the job, and you get them to see the final impact of what they do, an actual personal connection with the end user of their product, it activates the seeking system. The seeking system, when activated, it drops dopamine into our bloodstream. It makes our chemicals work differently. And there's a lot to be said for that. I could talk with you a bit about that if you'd like, but the two big ones are the word enthusiasm and the word time regulation. We could go down either of those paths, but
the time one was very interesting. Could you elaborate on that one? Is that
which one?
The time regulation?
Oh, absolutely.
That one really hit home for me.
It's really strong. And again, it seems to be a fact, or as they say in Washington, D.C., this is a true fact. It seems to be the case that dopamine is what controls whether we see time as moving fast or slow. So when you have a lot of dopamine, you have this enthusiasm and time just zips right by. And at the end of the day, all you want is more time. You feel as though there's so much more I could do if I just had another hour. There's almost like a time hunger. when you don't have dopamine in your system, time crawls by. It kind of feels like I have this vision of like pushing a sledge across dirt. It's really hard to move through the hours, and it just like the minutes tick by slowly. It's hard to get through a day sometimes.
I think we've all been there before.
We've all lived that.
Yeah, we have, especially in the workplace.
Yeah.
So many people. Yeah. So where do we start? I think the question whenever I have these conversations is always great, and it's fascinating stuff. Where would you advise leaders, not just HR, because this is for everyone, where would you advise them to start?
Yep. I think the most important thing would be to, first off, have this knowledge. I mean,
first step.
First step is to understand that this is a biology, not a psychology. So I think that's actually really important. Then when you know that there's these three activators, the idea of saying, where are we succeeding? I ran a session here recently at London Business School where we looked down through the HR methodologies or the tools. For instance, there's hiring, there's onboarding, there's training and development, there's incentives and motivation, there's performance review and feedback, there's learning and development. You can go through these different systems and you can say, almost build a grid that says, which one of our systems activates these different parts of the seeking system trigger? Like, for example, which one of these gets people to feel as though they can play to their strengths and reflect on who they are at their best? A lot of times the answer is none of them. Then we say, well, which one of these things then really encourages people to play around and try new things and experiment on the job? And a lot of times you might see the answer is like not really any of them. And then you say, well, which one of these then really shows people the power of their actions and sort of shows them the why? What shows them the purpose beyond the money? And a lot of times the answer is not really any of them.
I'm thinking about it now for my own company.
It's really tricky.
I'm sitting there thinking, I need to make sure my employees know this. Yeah.
That's right. Right now, I'm developing a survey that I'm going to put on my website that's going to allow people for free to have their employees take a survey that then gives them a score.
Wow.
And it's a way that it's going to be a little bit more professionalized than just musing about it. And it's going to be something that allows a direct comparison, anonymous, from the perspective of the employees there. So that's sort of, that's coming soon. Mm-hmm. But I would say that for my money, not knowing about this 3 years ago, it just doesn't allow you to cure it. If you think it's a bug in the system and you kind of blame the employees, you never get to understanding the root cause of the problem.
Yeah. So you think, I suppose HR is best placed to affect this, right?
I think it's a really great question. Yes is the answer. There's no question that the answer is yes. It's a little bit of a tricky question, though, because you and I and all the listeners there know that HR doesn't often have the most status, and they should. I think that there are times that I've thought hard about the notion of rebranding HR. I think that that's a different conversation. But I can tell you that whatever function is in charge of the emotions of the employee and creating the emotions of agility, and by that I mean the emotions of curiosity, of enthusiasm, of zest, whatever function is in charge of creating that will be that's the function that has the most importance in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a massive culture shift for the organization, sure. And most of the time, of course, HR is driving that. But before even you get to that point, all of the other leaders in the business need to be engaged.
That's it,
and that's the hard part. Getting the buy-in from everyone, all the other leaders, before you go down that route.
I think that you've just nailed it. I have found that my own experience is if you can get the CEO to listen to one of these speeches or read the book so that they buy it firsthand, everything else flows a lot easier. But a lot of times that is a bridge that's far away. And what it might take is an individual manager, with a team of 10 people or 30 people, to believe it and not wait for it to come from above, but to cause it to happen in their own team. I think that that's actually that organic cultural change. I actually would bet on that. I would bet on that being the way that organizations actually make this shift.
I agree. Rather than it being manufactured, it's very difficult to manufacture it. And that's one of the reasons why companies build these small teams. Whenever they try and create a culture shift, they create the small teams internally. Of those, early adopters, the innovators, the guys that are excited about it, and that kind of spreads out throughout the organization. That seems to be the method that works well. It really takes a leader, though, to be courageous enough.
That's right.
to take that first step, and that's the hard part. But at the same time, if you can link the benefits of what we've just spoken about with the strategy of the business and the strategic objectives, then you won't have any problem. But that's the biggest story, translating it into a language that the CEO and the other leaders can understand to get them in. One of the biggest challenges of HR in general anyway. So this is sort of just going along that. And everything you're talking about is in line with the different challenges that I'm hearing from HR leaders around the world. And, disengaged workforce is not a productive workforce, and all the other things that come along with it, which we've just said. So very interesting. So what were the sort of the key takeaways then from your research?
Yes.
That you
Can I summarize it this way? And I've really found this to be practical for HR leaders. If you start talking about neuroscience and you start talking about the biology underlying the innovation, you will get the attention of senior leaders in the organization. I have found this when I teach big rooms of senior bankers who manage hundreds and hundreds of people. Sometimes they'll poo-poo the psychology. And I hate to say it, but I'm just saying this is what I see. It's that sort of fuzzy bullshit. Yeah, it's the soft stuff. When you start talking about the neuroscience and you start talking about dopamine and you start talking about a part of the brain that is dedicated to what our organization needs, then they say, oh, tell me more. How do I light that up? I see what you're saying. It's something about the biology has more resonance with them. Mm-hmm. And so I actually would use that as a tool. If I was an HR leader, I think that there's a subtle shift here, less about the happiness and the psychology and more about the engagement, the curiosity, and where do those emotions come from?
I suppose it's because they can quantify that, and they can, right. It's not based on theory.
It's a medical issue.
Yeah, it's a real, exactly. Everyone's wired the same way, right? Everyone operates in the same way. So
you know what else is really interesting, and I should just warn you that I'm probably going to get a knock or a call here, and I'll have to go. But what I love about this, Chris, is this idea that it's not even just us humans; it's all mammals.
Yeah, it's everyone.
I mean, to be honest, if you have a bear in a cave that has all the food it needs and it's warm, it still goes out ambling looking for something. It's seeking something.
The unattainable.
It may not be the unattainable. It's just to learn.
Keep activating and keep.
Yes.
That's what I said. That's what I. That's one of you can see it in people. I can see it on my team just itching for something new to do, and I think we're all wired that way, aren't we? And if you let people get comfortable, then
we know factually that animals in the zoo don't like to be given their food in a bowl. They prefer to chase it, or to have to seek it out or find it. And when zoo managers do it this way, their health improves, they become more zestful, they have more energy. It's just really interesting how at the end of the day, this is a wired system. And I just don't think that we knew this.
Yeah, it almost seems too simple and so obvious, but something which is not discussed enough. So I'm really excited to share this with the members. Well, look, that leads us quite nicely onto the quickfire round before you have to jet off. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a leader within your industry?
I think there's a really important piece here where I think I pushed myself too far into the science. It's a funny thing.
Is there such a thing in your profession of pushing yourself too far?
There is. There certainly is. I mean, what it is I have, 48 articles in journals that you'll never hear of. And they are the science. I mean, they are sort of legitimated, peer-reviewed pieces of science, but I didn't work as hard creating the impact. The idea of pushing the knowledge out so that real people could use it to make a difference in the world in terms of creativity and making, the world better, let's say. I think that I took my eye off that ball. And so this book is really a punch in the direction of trying to, have more impact with the knowledge.
That's exactly the reason I created this podcast.
Yeah, man. That's great.
I was hearing all
That's
of
why
this
we're together.
Yeah, exactly. I was creating all of this hearing all of these amazing stories and all of this great knowledge, but I was like, no one's putting it out there. If no one knows about it,
that's it.
And then it's especially in a world where it's so connected now.
Yep.
It's almost like criminal not to share it, and there's almost
so happy
it's quite hard. It also is there's also a negative to that you have to get through all of the crap to find the good stuff.
Yep.
So there's also a negative to it too, is that there's so much out there
Yep.
that sometimes it's very hard to find this.
That's right.
Great feedback there. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
I read this book, and I know that you'll know it, called
You read books?
By Adam Grant. And it's a really interesting phenomenon. And you actually alluded to it earlier before we turned on the mics here. But I think the idea that to try to think harder about what you're giving rather than what you're trying to take. I think that if you're looking for sustainable customer relationships, you're looking for sustainable value production, you're looking for sustainable profitability, all of this demands that you're creating more value than you're taking. And you should start with that question. And again, that it actually goes back to the first issue that I had. Rather than saying, what can I sort of take as my job as a professor? It's what can I learn so that I can give out to people and make things work better? So I find that book, Give and Take, to be enormously helpful in terms of putting some of that into perspective and using evidence. Again, speaking the language that I had become accustomed to, using evidence to kind of prove the points.
Yeah, amazing. What's one book do you recommend on the point of books?
Okay. In addition to this Give and Take, one that it just really moved me is a book called Redirect by Tim Wilson. And that is a really, really strong book about the stories that we tell ourselves. And he shows that by changing the stories that we tell ourselves about what's going on in the world and about ourselves, it changes the way we act in that world. And it also changes what we project into that world.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I definitely can relate to that one. I always try to do my affirmations.
Yeah.
to make sure that I'm in the right frame of mind. Because what you are, what you're thinking is what's reflected on the outside.
That is so good. That is
very, very interesting. Something I found very useful when I was heavily in sales was to have the affirmations to keep yourself sane.
That's right.
And make sure that's a very important topic. Could you share one internet resource that you use to keep up to date with your own productivity and current events in your field?
It's interesting. Harvard Business Review is for leaders, but for the type of leadership I'm most interested in, it's on the cutting edge. And it's quite interesting for me just how easy and accessible they make that. So it's one of the places I get loads and loads of the practical stuff that I can take into a classroom. And then I also have the much more scientific stuff that my guess is lots of the readers wouldn't be as interested in, but I'll go ahead and say them.
Sure.
There's a journal called Administrative Sciences Quarterly, and there's a journal called Academy of Management Journal, and there's a journal called Organization Science. And these three journals have really cutting edge stuff, and it's really applicable. I mean, it's very, very useful. It's just that those aren't the journals that most people know because they have quantitative method sections, and there's a whole section on the analytics, and it's sometimes a little hard to get through. So that's the stuff that ends up being popularized in the Harvard Business Review. So
they sort of put it in layman's terms for us.
And not only they, but I mean, that's something that we are trying to do these days, is we're trying to popularize our own research.
Well, I think, as I said, we can go on about that. It's a very important topic. And now a lot of the academics that I speak to are incredible, but they don't actually understand how to market themselves.
That's right. That's absolutely it.
Incredible work. You never know about them whereas you've got people that on the other end who are very good at marketing themselves, understand how to utilize social media, etc. But don't have actually the best content. It's a very interesting times that we're in right now. Well, look, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Honestly, we could talk about this all day. It's such a fascinating topic, and I'm really excited to share this with our listeners. And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions from listeners as well. Before we go, give our listeners one parting piece of guidance and the best way to get in contact with you.
Okay, great. In terms of getting in contact, there's a website, dan-cable.com. That's probably the best. Also, just hit me up on LinkedIn. That seems to be the way I'm connecting a lot right now. So either of those work really well from my perspective. Just because I'm so fascinated by it right now, in terms of this advice, the idea of using those 3 activators of the seeking system, I might just be going overboard on it right now. But for me, both as a consultant and as a speaker, talking to people like our listeners right now, that diagnostic really seems to help them highlight where their systems are pointed in the wrong direction and what it would take to try to reinvent human resources around activating the seeking system, around creating enthusiasm about change, about igniting experimentation that leads to innovation. So for me, that is very practical. That is not useless, interesting knowledge. That is really practical knowledge.
Yeah, Mother Nature.
Mother Nature has given us the facilities.
Exactly. So when's the book out? Is it out now?
It's starting to ship right now. The formal date is March 27, and it's with Harvard Business Press. And so,
how can we get it?
I think Amazon's the best, but all kinds of booksellers as well. Apparently, it's going to be in the Barnes and Nobles and in the Waterstones.
Nice, perfect.
Hopefully, pick it up at an airport near you.
An airport. That's like the go-to place for a book now. Well, look, guys, head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all of the links, all of the show notes, everything we're talking about. I'll link that up in the description. Again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. And I'm excited to read the book. And I wish you all the best with your book tour.
Thank you so much.
We'll speak soon. Okay.
Great chatting with you.